Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So I think, yeah, I changed my headset from Monday, so hopefully this one works. So welcome to the next session, panel session. You should be able to see my slides now as well.
Yes, it's correct.
Okay, good. So welcome to the next panel session on data enrichments. And hopefully, yeah, we have 6 papers in this panel session. And the format is that the authors, again, so you're all supposed to have seen the presentations online beforehand, and the structure of the session will be that the authors, again, will briefly introduce their papers, so maximally 2 minutes. In the meantime, you can already ask questions in the chat. I will relay them to the authors after their short presentation. We have about 5 minutes time discussion per paper, and then maybe at the end we'll have some time left for a general discussion. We'll see about that. Okay, so I now invite Xavier Marjoux to briefly introduce his paper on generating IPA pronunciation from audio. Xavier, are you?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, you didn't. Do you have your own slides? I took the liberty to take some screen caps for you on your behalf. But if you want to use your own slides, please let me know.
No, that's fine with
Okay, good. So the floor is yours to briefly present your paper.
Okay, so my name is Xavier Marjoux, and I would say that I'm basically just a Wiktionary user, and I did edit a lot of phonemic pronunciation in the Wiktionary, especially in the French Wiktionary, and especially for French words. When doing this kind of job, I found it a little bit frustrating, and I wondered whether there was a way to at least perform some of these corrections automatically. And this is why I experimented and described a paper with a method to identify.
Excuse me, Xavier, could you speak a bit louder or a bit closer to the mic? Thank you.
Yeah. So the paper I want to describe and discuss today is a method in order to identify possible mistakes in the phonemic pronunciation associated to French word of the French Wiktionary. And to do so, I used a speech recognition method based on processing the audio samples of a word and to predict an estimation of its phonemic pronunciation. I then used the estimation performed by this speech recognition tool or artificial neural network. And I compared this estimation with what was written in the dictionary. And if the difference was huge, then there was probably a mistake in the Wiktionary. So this is basically what is described in this paper.
Sorry. Thank you for your short presentations. Are there any questions? I haven't seen any in the chat, but please, if you do have questions, post them in the chat. I already have one question for you, Xavier. I've put it also in my slides. If you look at what you also give in your online presentation, most of these sound files, they have some geolocation attached to them, probably because to show, or so that you can hear that it's a specific accent, even though some of them still have the same phonetic transcription. So my question is, did you use that geographic tag of the recordings in any way? Is it used by the artificial neural network, or could it be useful? Because maybe it is an indicator of what kind of pronunciation to expect as well.
This is a very interesting question. No, at the time, well, for the experimentation, I did use such a tag. And I took the assumption that most words were pronunciated by typically French people. So I know that not all French people pronunciate the words with the same way, but so in fact, I did not took care about any strong differences in the way the audio samples may reflect some differentiations in the pronunciation. That would be something very interesting to do, but I suspect that for most words, there wouldn't be many strong differences. For example, let's ideally, I think the data set would need pronunciations performed by, let's say, one or two people from France, one or two people from Canada, one or two people from, I don't know,
Belgium.
Yeah. and then we could use such tags to generate phonemic pronunciation according to different locations. And that would be great and very interesting. But so far, this is not the case. So.
Okay. Then there is a question from the chat from Olga Babina. What kind of input parameters did you use for the artificial neural network to learn?
Well, actually, I don't know if the question is about the sample which is given as an input to the neural network, or if the question is regarding the hyperparameters of the networks. But I will answer to both questions so that I'm sure I answer the question. So regarding what is given to the artificial neural network as an input, it's just an audio sample. So basically it's a wave file describing the word, but as a, for example, the word bonjour is the audio sample containing bonjour. But the file was pre-processed from a wave file to an MFCC file. So it's just a kind of Fourier transform to compress basically the file. And then regarding the architecture of the neural network, basically I reused a typical architecture for speech recognition. I tried different hyperparameters, but the big difference was not in terms of parameters, but it was really the number of samples which needed to be important. As far as I remember, I needed more than 20,000 samples to make it work. And this was, I would say, the most important thing.
Okay. Thank you. I think we now have to go to the next paper. So I invite John McCrae to do the short presentation on enriching a terminology for under-resourced languages using knowledge graphs. And I'll show your introductory slide.
Hi, okay, so you hear me?
Yes.
All right, so this is a project that was joint work between the Adapt Centre in Ireland and Translators Without Borders, who are a charity who work on developing terminologies and lexicographic resources for use in crisis situations. And this particular project was focused on the Rohingya refugee crisis, which is a sort of migratory crisis caused by a genocide in Burma. So a lot of the Rohingya have been forced out of Burma and into an area in southeast Bangladesh called Cox's Bazar, near the city of Chittagong. So we're looking at some very severely under-resourced languages here. So we're looking, so these TWB are developing resources in English, also in the national languages of Bangladesh and Burma, so Bengali and Burmese, but also the local language. So Chittagonian is the language of the area where most of the refugees are, and of course Rohingya have a language of their own. So we approach this as a sort of a data enrichment idea, where we try to build existing terminologies by connecting them with other resources. So we used the NASH tool, which was developed in the eLex project, and I presented at a demo yesterday. And then we linked the glossaries using primarily the English data up with some open source resources, so particularly Wikidata and the open English WordNet, which then sort of then connects up to the whole linked open data cloud, Wikipedia, more WordNets, the whole Lexis infrastructure and such like. So this linking was then developed or presented in a user interface where the individual lexicographers at TWB could look at the suggestions that had come from the linking and choose which elements of these external resources they wanted to incorporate into their taxonomy, or sorry, into their terminology and then the dictionary. So this is a way that we could easily add a lot more information, a lot more languages, alternative definitions, potential synonyms, and all kinds of other terms very easily into the resources. So that's got a quick summary of the project in 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. If there are any questions for John, please put them in the chat. I already have one prepared. So I was very intrigued by the new corpora you created for these very lowly resourced languages, Chittagonian and Rohingya. But I wasn't sure what translators without borders, what the lexicographers there would use those new corpora for. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, I mean, the short answer was in the project we used them to make examples. So we'd add example sentences showing the usage of these particular terms or words in context. So that was the primary goal. But I mean, obviously, we hope that we can continue this work and do some more sophisticated NLP techniques using the corpora, which is of course a requirement. But for the moment, it was just basically dictionary examples that we're pulling from corpora.
Yeah, and were there many medically relevant or yeah?
Well, I mean, these glossaries are designed for aid workers, so they're medically relevant, but they cover very general.
Yeah, well, relevant to the aid workers. Let's say, could you find that in the corpora? Because could you find terminology from the glossary readily in the new corpora, or was that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously these corpora are still quite incomplete, so there's still not complete coverage. But as I said, a lot of the terms that are actually in the TWB terminologies are fairly basic.
Yeah.
So a lot of it, a certain amount of it was covered. I don't have the statistics up off my head.
Well, I'll check the chat for any questions. I don't see any questions there. Oh yes, there is one from Peter Meyer. Do you think your approach can be extended beyond terminology proper, that is, to cover general everyday vocabulary?
Yeah, so I mean, we say terminology, but in fact, the content of these resources is more general purpose language. It's fairly basic terms like water and food and such like that the aid workers really need to know. So we were linking to WordNet. So we had something of a general purpose dictionary as a target. And this creates there's a lot of ambiguity there, which is why we had to use the NASH tool in order to resolve the ambiguity by doing the kind of definition matching. So we're looking at the definitions of terms given So you might have a basic term like water, and that would be in the terminology. So we'd have to then map that definition to any potential definitions of a sense in WordNet.
Okay. Okay. Any more questions in the chat? Yes, from Anne Denio. Is the audience primarily aid workers, and are the Rohingya able to access the results of your research as well?
So yeah, so the audience is primarily aid workers. The resources are open, so there wouldn't be anything stopping it, but stopping say Rohingya from accessing it. There are two barriers. First of all, the website is in English, well, literacy in general is quite low among the Rohingya population, and certainly, reading English. So these resources, this sort of our users, our aid workers, but they're open, and hopefully, as the situation improves, these resources could find more use among the populations.
Okay, thank you. I think we then go to the next paper, which will be presented by Kristian Blensenius and Sköldberg and Erik Bäckerud about finding gaps in semantic descriptions. Okay.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. And Emma and I are from the University of Gothenburg, and Erik is from, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
good. Yeah. And Erik is from the Swedish Academy Dictionary in Lund in Sweden. So we wanted to be able to get an overview of semantic special links called cross-references in our case in this second revised edition of the Contemporary Dictionary of the Swedish Academy, which is also called SO in our paper, in order to find gaps, inconsistencies, or just mistakes in the linking system. So we have tried to use visualization of cross-references in order to find the gaps in these semantic networks. And why is this? Well, because we know that cross-references between semantically related headwords especially is important for both reception and production. And we also know that synonyms or antonyms and stuff like that provide additional semantic information to words. So for example, cross-referencing between nouns for cardinal directions, such as north, it requires a link to south, maybe, in order to get a fuller understanding of the word. And we use a data visualization software called Constellation, which is a free open source software, originally developed at the Australian Signals Directorate in 2012. And here we see on the slide, first to the left, where the entry is one active, which is an adjective meaning active, and then two active, which is a noun meaning active voice then. And to the right, we see the visualization of the network for active as unfortunately the star is not there, but to the right we see the adjective active, and which is a yellow, and yellow means that it is an adjective. Then yellow boxes are adjectives, and as you can see here, orange boxes are nouns and greens are verbs. And then we have different arrows. So red arrows represent opposite. So as you can see, there's an opposite link from active, the adjective, to another adjective, passive, which is passive then. And then and it is bi-directional, so it seems okay. And then there is the noun active at the top, the orange box, and then as you can see, there are red arrows between active and passive there as well. So it seems to be rather consistent in this rather unproblematical case then. And we can go to the next slide. So to conclude, we thanks to this software, it's easier than before to get an overview of the semantic network, but a lot of the work remains, and many entries in this dictionary are completely isolated, and they include no cross-references at all, which they should be doing. And we also have need to adjust some traditional lexicographic policies, because this is originally a print dictionary. So we need to see what these labels actually refer to. And also, finally, we are open to suggestions when it comes to the software. Maybe you have other better ways of visualizing this network. Thank you.
Okay, we still have time for 1 or 2 questions. I don't see any questions yet in the chat, but I have a question for you. From your presentation online, I wasn't sure whether the cross references and the arrows in the the cross references in the dictionaries and the arrows in the visualization were situated at the lemma level or the sense level. So I guess
yeah, these are lemma level references. Yes.
Okay, and
correct.
so my question relating to that is that could it be interesting to also have these arrows and links at the sense level to find inconsistencies within lemmas, for example, synonymy that's cross-reference to the wrong sense, so that it's not completely symmetrical?
Yes, that's correct. It's a technical thing, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
But that's not done at this point. Okay. Good. Then there is a question in the chat. Do you think the visualization should differ for users using dictionaries for language production and for language reception? A question from Anna Frankenberg.
Yeah, thank you. At the moment, this is just used by editors, this visualization. So I haven't really thought about that question, but I will. I don't have a very elaborate answer at the moment, but that is a good suggestion. But at the moment, it's just for the editors. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Not at this point. So thank you again for your presentation and your answers. And then I propose we go to the next paper, which will be presented by Peter Meyer and Ngoc Duyen Tanya Tu, a word embedding approach to onomasiological search in multilingual loanword lexicography. Peter and Ngoc Duyen, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yes,
okay.
We can hear you clearly.
So we are Tanya Tu and Peter Meyer from the Leibniz Institute for the German Language. And we have that multilingual resource on German lexical loans in other languages. Semantic search in such a resource is usually based on the idea that users select among a given number of semantic fields or domains or whatever you call them. We wanted to explore an alternative or rather complementary approach, just as an experiment. In the context of our resource, an advanced search with an onomasiological component will roughly look like the screenshot on this slide here. It says, give me German nouns. You can read it from top to bottom, borrowed into Polish or Ukrainian, with senses similar in meaning to keywords Rhythmus and Tanz, English rhythm and dance, obviously. The idea is that those keywords available to the user form a substantial part of the German core vocabulary, something like the 10 or 20,000 most frequent words. This allows users to use the search in an exploratory, Google-like fashion without having to re-engineer semantic field taxonomies. The technical details are in our video, but basically we compute similarities between embeddings, word embeddings for keywords on the one hand, and vectors for word sense definitions on the other hand. To obtain the vectors for word senses, we have to link each word sense definition in the database with one or more words for which we have embeddings. As the default case, we just take the word the sense description is all about, and post-editing is then required to account for issues with polysemy, etc. This is an experiment only just begun that makes sense only under the conditions of our heterogeneous special niche resource And we are looking very much forward to suggestions from the audience. Thank you very much. I can't hear you, Kris, at the moment.
Yes, yeah, really.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Now I can hear you. Yeah, thank you.
Still problems with that. So thank you for the presentation. Any questions are welcome in the chat. I don't see any yet, but I already have a question for you. So in your online presentation, you quite cleverly, because you do not have a real test yet, you quite cleverly used Germanat to assess how well certain search keys would work. So can you say a bit on what you plan to do for the actual test? Will you compare the usefulness of search keys to actual search behavior? By users?
Yeah, we have some ideas on what we could do. We do plan to implement a semantic field-based search option besides the one that we are presenting here. And we would like to set up some usage research study scenario that enables us to compare how well users fare with either approach. So if one of them works better than the other for certain possible usage scenarios. But all in all, it's very tricky in this area to get to reasonable and sensible usage research on this aspect of dictionary use, actually, because it's so very hard to define what is a proper or correct search result when you, for example, enter a keyword or you enter a semantic field.
Okay. A question from Henrik Lorentzen. What are the intended users of your resource?
It's actually open to both a wider interested public, because loanwords do generate a lot of public interest in laypersons. But we also hope to address researchers who want easy access and advanced search options for material on German loanwords and other languages. So it's a little bit of both. And at the moment, the user experience is heavily tilted towards experienced users, and we are going to change that with the next totally revamped version of the Lehnwort Portal, where we want to very systematically approach the needs of both lay persons and expert users by clearly separating the concerns on the user interface side.
Okay, and another question from the chat: is there a particular reason for using ConceptNet number batch? A question from Simon Craig.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and also, of course, for the questions before. That's a very good question. It's actually a practical thing. The ConceptNet offers rather high quality word embeddings for some AT languages, and the word embeddings are aligned in one vector space, and that's very important for us, because we want to actually make use of the fact that we can use words from different languages in our approach. Other than that, we will definitely try to swap ConceptNet with other available resources, because that's possible without many problems. You can just swap one set of pre-computed embeddings with another one. We cannot compute the embeddings ourselves because our material is so special, right? You have those dictionaries. We don't have the corpora behind the dictionaries, and a lot of the vocabulary is extinct or archaic or highly specialized. So there is no good reason to use general purpose resources that are used in other contexts. We have to this is in a certain sense, this is the last resort decision. Yeah. To use something like ConceptNet for these purposes.
Okay, thank you. I guess we thank you for your presentation and your answers to the questions. I think we now go to the next paper by Rogelio Nazar, Automatic Induction of Multilingual Taxonomy for Discourse Markers. Rogelio, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes, a bit, not too loud, but yeah, we hear you.
Well, I will try to shout.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The object of study in this research is discourse markers, which is a particular subset of the vocabulary units, which are not considered lexical units. They are functional units or grammatical units, and they are a very, very large set. So it is particularly difficult to map them. So that is the purpose of this research, to try to offer a very wide catalog of these units in different languages. So this is the main, the most important points of the methodology. We try to first separate these units from the rest of the vocabulary. Then we try to organize them in a taxonomy, and by a clustering procedure, we then tag these clusters automatically with meaningful names. And this is by this we make a core taxonomy, which is then used to expand, to slowly expand this research. So there is a next slide in which I offer some examples of one small, rather small cluster of what you would call contrastive connectives, such as, yes, in English, things such as nevertheless, nonetheless, and so on. These are the kinds of discourse markers. At this point, we have 5 languages, but we are planning to incorporate more in the near future. And there is also a website in the next slide that you can visit, where you will find all the material we have so far, which is the core taxonomy, but we are slowly in the process of incorporating more units. And I think that would be a very, very short introduction to the paper.
Okay, thank you. So time for questions. Please put your questions in the chat box. I already have one question for you from your online presentation. In your online presentation, you discuss that you use Opus, right, as a parallel corpus to find all these pairs, I guess, throughout languages. I wasn't sure whether you do a full word alignment on those Opus corpus, on the Opus corpus. More specifically, whether you also sort of use negative evidence that a word or a multi-word unit is probably not a discourse marker because it's aligned to something, that is clearly not a discourse marker.
Well, I think it's a good question, and it's also a good suggestion for the future. Regarding the question, we do not use full word alignment. The thing is that we first separate, in a monolingual step, we first separate the discourse markers from the rest of the vocabulary units using an information coefficient. That means if you can predict the appearance of a word given such a word, then we suppose it is not a discourse markers, because we define discourse markers as unit with very low quantity of information. So we first separate the candidates monolingually, let's say, and then once we have the list separated from the rest of the units, we then proceed to align them. So if you are, however, in English, for instance, you can only be aligned in the Spanish sides with units that have previously been separated as discourse markers candidates. That said, however, I think it's a good idea to perhaps use the full word alignment, maybe not to try to predict to find negative evidence, but maybe to find evidence of a possible polyfunctionality of discourse markers, which, as I said in the video, is a very interesting topic. That is the fact that you can you very often find units that have more than one function. They can function as discourse markers in some contexts, and maybe not in others. So that would be an idea that is worth to explore. So thank you very much for that.
I don't see any questions in the in the chat yet. But I have one question of clarification maybe. So already in the monolingual step first, you already include multi-word expressions. They do not come about through the alignments. You already have a way to include both single words and multi-word expressions as discourse markers, because there are quite some multi-word expressions, especially in English there, right? Oops.
Yes, in all languages, and it's a very, very hard problem to properly segment these units, but we simply use engrams, sequences of words.
Okay.
1, 2, 3 words.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Then we go to the last paper by, I think it's Wojtek that will do the presentation on identifying metadata-specific collocations in text corpora. Wojtek, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kris. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I do hear a bit of echo, but I'll...
Okay. Okay, hello, I'm Wojciech Kovář from Masaryk University and Lexical Computing, and this is a joint work with Miloš Jakubíček and Ondřej Herman from the same institutions. The paper is about thinking and the mathematics behind what is now a new feature in the sketch engine, illustrated by the picture on the left, which is connecting text types with collocations in word sketches. So we are trying to identify which collocation is somehow specific for a particular text type. This is of course relevant only if we have good metadata in the corpus. And I will not elaborate here on the mathematics. It's in the video and in the paper. But we have the result is we have introduced 3 labels, especially, usually, and always, where especially means that the collocation is relatively more frequent in the particular text type than in the rest in the corpus, whereas usually and always mark that the absolute number of hits or the majority, the absolute majority of occurrences is in that particular text type. So we have thought through the maths around it. We have proposed the formulas, and we have compiled the results with some initial examples. The example on the picture is for BNC. And for the metadata David Lee's classification, which tell us, for example, that bad news occur much more in a tabloid newspaper than in the rest of the corpus, or that the good news are very frequent in religious texts. And that's it. It's still in the initial phase. This example of British National Corpus can be found on the beta installation of the sketch engine, but we hope it will be more widely available soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's good news, and not in a religious context. Good. Questions then? Please put your questions in the chat again. I'll already ask one question myself. So I was thinking, you mentioned that in the beginning, yeah, there are other ways to find these collocations that are very specific to a genre or a metadata subcorpus. So how is your approach conceptually different from doing multi-word keywords per subcorpus and then rearrange them per head word in a multi-word? Something that would be very similar, right?
Yeah, if I understand correctly your idea of multi-word keywords rearranged per word, then I would say the maths will be the same. all in all, the computations were possible even before, as we mentioned in the paper, that you can do some clicking and you see the same. But I feel the advantage of this development is that you look at the word sketch as a summary of the word, and you see the information directly there. You don't need to think if you should investigate if that particular collocation is specific for a particular.
You do the rearrangement per word for us, right?
Yeah, that's actually the rearrangement. Right.
I see very good comments on good news, but also on that it's a very nice functionality. Not really a question yet, as I can see. I have a second question though. You mentioned that in the talk as well online. You sometimes these metadata classifications of subcorpora are not that ideal of interpretable. So is there a functionality that maybe users can reorganize the metadata classifications into something they want to see in the collocation information?
Do you mean like, well, the short answer is no, or not yet.
Not yet.
But do you mean like changing the metadata type, or
combining metadata categories into one, something like that, but specifically for this task?
Yeah, the data are indexed, so it means that after some change, the corpus needs some recompilation. So it's not currently possible. Okay. It would include corpus recompilation.
I see there is one question in this chat now from Henrik Lorentzen, but I think that's exactly the whole thing you discuss in the online presentation. How do you distinguish between especially, usually? So that's the maths, right? Look at the presentation. And then Simon has a question as far as Sketch Engine is concerned. It's like whatever metadata is there in the corpus, it will process it, or are some categories expected?
Well, currently it's like there is a corpus configuration option that specifies which metadata are interesting for this feature. So you say compute this feature for David Lee's classification and text type or something.
Okay. Good. We have 3 minutes left for a general discussion. That's not that much. So are there any questions that authors want to ask other authors, or that questions from the general audience that haven't been asked yet, and that you more general questions maybe that you would want to ask? Again, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, I was thinking about a question that affects the whole data enrichment fields, something like that. So we all know that all automatic enrichment still contains noise, and of course we do checks against some gold standard usually, but often I think that was in a few tasks. It's not clear whether something is noise or not, but so a more general question is how noisy can the data enrichment be before it loses its added value? So maybe what strategies do people employ to have this feeling of, or assessment more likely, where too much noise is being added for the functionality to be. Any one of the authors who wants to, please do take the floor.
Well, if I may, it's really hard to draw a line between like useful and not useful, but I have a point of view from the post-editing lexicography. What we've experienced in another project that Milos presented yesterday was that when we generate more data for for example, entry and a dictionary entry to be post-edited, it is better to have the earlier stages post-edited first. So I think the line that cannot be drawn is rather low. We need rather high quality data to produce high quality output.
Yeah. I think that's all we have time for. It's 1 o'clock. Some of you might want lunch. I thank you for all the authors for their contributions to the panel and for the audience for their questions. And we'll see some of you in 15 minutes time for the next panel session. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kris.
Bye.
Very nice session. Bye.
Oh yeah, I forgot. And there is Lex Meet, of course.
Bye.